My source tonight is the Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York. And Congressman, first off, do you think this is a good idea for President Trump to get as involved as he is getting here?
Well, look, he's a New Yorker, born and raised in New York City.
Yes.
Obviously, he cares deeply about what goes on in New York. I think the fact is this is disastrous for the country to have an avowed socialist who talks about seizing the means of production, who talks about banning private property ownership, who wants to defund the police, shut down prisons. Now he's talking about getting rid of the gang database, which is insane. He wants government-run grocery stores. What happens in New York does not stay in New York. And I think the president certainly understands the impact that Zoran Mandami's election would have nationwide. We've seen since AOC won her election in 2018, a number of socialist candidates get elected to city council, to state legislature in New York, including Zoran Mandami, who won in a Democratic primary back in 2020 for state assembly in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district. So the reality
been a bunch who were defeated, people who had ran on ideas like this, and instead centrist Dems were elected. But
now you have him as the Democratic candidate for mayor, and he is espousing all of these views.
I'm not surprised you don't like Zoran Mandami or agree with his views.
We served together in the state assembly.
Yes, you did, back in 2020, I believe, right?
Yep.
Do you believe, though, that President Trump's involvement is helpful here?
Look, ultimately, New York City voters are going to make a determination. I think the president is right that this cannot be a multi-candidate race. Each of the candidates needs to look introspectively and see whether or not they have a viable path forward. And if they don't, in my opinion, I've been saying this for months, they need to get out of the way so that one candidate who does have support can actually unify the anti-Zoran base of voters. You've got to look at New York City elections. Only 25% of registered voters in New York City have voted in the last two mayoral elections. It is a very low turnout. Zoran Mandami won the primary with about 13% of registered voters supporting him. So ultimately, you have a pathway if it's a one-on-one race. If it's a multi-candidate race, Zoran will be the mayor.
Do you agree with President Trump that the others should drop out, so it's Mandami versus Cuomo?
Look, I am supporting Curtis Sliwa. I think Andrew Cuomo is responsible for a lot of the problems in New York, including signing cashless bail into law, which has been a disaster. Jessica Tisch coming out today saying what a disaster cashless bail was for crime in New York City. You look at, New York being a sanctuary state, Andrew Cuomo signed that. Congestion pricing, Andrew Cuomo signed that. The challenges impacting New York, a lot of it at the hands of Andrew Cuomo. So I don't think he's a great solution here. But my view has been whoever is best positioned by September to take on Zoran Mandami, the other candidates need to look themselves in the mirror, recognize the reality, and do what is right by New Yorkers, not themselves or their party. And so ultimately, I think the candidates need to make a very quick decision as to whether or not they have a viable path. And if they don't, they need to get out.
Speaking of cashless bail, that's something that the president was talking about today when talking about his kind of federal takeover of D.C., crime here in Washington today. It was during a speech he was giving at the Bible Museum in Washington. There was one comment he made that caught our attention. I want everyone to listen to that.
They said crime's down 87%. I said, no. It's more than 87%. Virtually nothing. And much lesser things that take place in the home they call crime. They'll do anything they can to find something. If a man has a little fight with the wife, they say, this was a crime, see? So now I can't claim 100%. But we are a safe city.
Did that strike you as dismissive of reports of domestic assault, domestic violence?
It wasn't very clear to me, but the bottom line is domestic violence is a serious issue across this country. We have seen it. I have met with numerous organizations that deal with domestic violence on a daily basis. They do great work trying to help victims of domestic violence. It's part of the reason why I have fought time and again to make sure that those who perpetrate domestic violence don't have access to guns. We see the impact there. But if you look at the overall situation in Washington, D.C., Crime is down in large measure because resources have been extended. Law enforcement, the National Guard, the DEA, the ATF, the FBI have come in to flood the zone. This is a problem in cities all across our country. You look at New York, 80% of those who commit crimes with a gun are released back out onto the street. You know, Zoran Mandami talking about getting rid of the gang database. Under Raise the Age, 16 and 17-year-olds are using guns in the commission of a crime, and they're getting a slap on the wrist and released back out into the streets. That's why gangs are hiring them. We have to take this seriously. The problem has not been the police. It has been politicians like Zoran Mandami, like Andrew Cuomo, like Kathy Hochul, who support cashless bail, raise the age, defunding the police. That has created this crisis that we have seen all across our country.
We started the show asking your Democratic colleague in the House about the release of these new Jeffrey Epstein documents tonight. Have you looked at them, and what is your view of what was released tonight and the letter that the White House has said doesn't exist, but seems to purportedly show President Trump's signature at the bottom of it?
So look, I have said from the very beginning, anyone who committed a criminal offense as part of this entire Epstein scandal should be prosecuted. Anybody who was involved in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes against these women, these victims of rape, of sexual assault, of abuse, should be prosecuted. The FBI and the Department of Justice have had all of these records for years. Our committee, the Oversight Committee on the House Oversight Committee, has already released over 30,000 documents. Last week, I
but a lot of it was already public.
supported a resolution, a rule to authorize the committee to release this, to continue to push them to release these documents. The document you're reporting on tonight came from those subpoenas that were issued by the committee. So all of this information is going to come out. It's going to be made available to the public. But as I've said, the challenge here, what I see, is that this has been politicized in such a way to make it all about politics as opposed to the victims. Anybody who has been abused by Jeffrey Epstein, or anyone that has been involved in the human trafficking or the sexual assault and exploitation of these women, these children, should be prosecuted, period.
Representative Mike Lawler, Republican, New York, discussed his concerns regarding the New York City mayoral race and President Trump's potential involvement. As a New Yorker, Lawler explained that Trump's deep concern for the state's political landscape is evident. However, Lawler emphasized that the situation was dire for the country, particularly with the rise of socialist candidates like Zoran Mandami, who advocates for seizing private property, defunding the police, and shutting down prisons. Mandami's proposal to remove the gang database was also described by Lawler as insane, given the growing concerns around crime in the city. Lawler recounted how Mandami's rise began with his success in the 2020 state assembly primary, especially in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez district. He pointed out that since 2018, New York had seen an increasing number of socialist candidates gaining traction within the Democratic Party. Despite his criticism of Mandami's views, Lawler expressed that he wasn't surprised by Mandami's candidacy, but did stress the national implications of such a political shift in New York. Lawler also echoed President Trump's call for a unified effort against Mandami. He agreed that the mayoral race should not involve multiple candidates, but instead require a consolidated front to oppose Mandami. Lawler highlighted the problem of low voter turnout in recent New York City elections, where only a small percentage of registered voters had participated. This low turnout, he argued, could be problematic in a multi-candidate race, where Mandami's position could be solidified without a strong, unified challenge. While expressing his support for Curtis Lewa, Lawler criticized Andrew Cuomo's legacy, citing policies like cashless bail, which he believes have contributed to the crime issues in New York. He further criticized Cuomo for his actions as governor, such as signing the sanctuary state law and congestion pricing. Lawler suggested that Cuomo's approach had failed the state, and he believed that any candidate with a genuine path to defeating Mandami should step aside to avoid splitting the vote. On the topic of crime, Lawler responded to President Trump's comments about Washington, D.C. He acknowledged that domestic violence is a serious issue, but pointed out that crime in D.C. had decreased partly due to increased law enforcement efforts. Lawler argued that the real problem in cities like New York is not the police, but the policies of politicians like Mandami, Cuomo, and Governor Kathy Hochul, who support cashless bail and other controversial measures that, according to Lawler, exacerbate the crime problem. Lawler also criticized Mandami's position on the gang database, stating that the failure to address crimes committed by young offenders, who are often given minimal sentences, only enables gangs to recruit younger individuals. He argued that eliminating such databases and allowing these offenders to remain unaccountable contributes to a cycle of crime. Finally, Lawler addressed the ongoing release of documents related to the Epstein case, reaffirming his stance that anyone involved in Epstein's criminal activities should be held accountable. He also condemned the politicization of the issue, stressing that it should not be about partisan gain, but about securing justice for the victims of Epstein's abuse and exploitation. Lawler committed to supporting efforts that push for the continued release of documents to the public, ensuring transparency in the investigation.